Hi everybody, TJ Mack Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here. Hope you all had an amazing Thanksgiving and were able to spend some quality time with family. I know I did. It was a pretty quiet and relaxing day, just how I like it. And to top it off, the Cowboys won, so it made the day even better. Now today I want to talk about collecting, specifically what I would do if I were starting a vintage card collection today. I've been collecting for now about 26 years, starting when I was 24 years old. And now at 50, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on how my approach to this hobby has changed some over the years. But just to be clear, what I'm sharing today, it's not advice. You might hear it that way, and that's fine. But I believe collecting is a deeply personal journey. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Every collector has to find their own path based on their interests and their goals. My goal here is to simply share my perspective, what I've learned, what's worked for me, and hopefully spark some ideas or inspiration for your own collecting journey. If I were starting to collect today, I'd feel both excited and a bit overwhelmed. There's just so much out there, and it's easy to get lost in where to begin. I know my main goal would be to build a collection that truly feels mine, something that reflects my personality and passion. And I'd want to curate it in a way that I can enjoy it. And then when I'm no longer collecting, my family can keep what they connect with, and then they can sell the rest for financial gain whenever that time comes. Now, as I get older, this becomes even more important to me. But it's always come down, for me at least, to knowing myself and what I want. I think that has to be true for most collectors. Now, the type of person I am is one that thrives on focus and setting goals. This has helped me in my career, in coaching youth sports, and in building the collection of my dreams. And when I collect, I do best with a clear focus, not a narrow one. And I know that's not true for everybody, so each collector has to find what works for them. But having some type of focus gives me direction that guides me towards cards and magazines that I really enjoy. And I'm about building themes within my collection, displaying my cards and magazines in a way that captures a larger story or narrative that has meaning to me. When I started collecting at 24, I made a lot of mistakes. I was young and still figuring out life and the hobby, and I ended up with some things I regret. For example, I once bought top sets from 1993 to 2007. I have no real interest in cards from those years. I just don't feel the connection. And while they didn't cost much, now I've got 15 years worth of binders that I don't really want. They're tough to sell because they're heavy, but I plan on moving them to get cards I do want. Another mistake was buying key cards from non-top sets from the 80s and 90s and placing them in binders. It wasn't a real expensive project, and I didn't get that far with it. But again, I have cards around me that don't bring me any joy, so why even have them? Now, it's inevitable you're going to pick up cards that don't end up meaning much to you, but over time, if you stay focused, you get better at knowing what you want. At least that's been my experience. So if I were starting today, knowing what I know now, I'd take my time. I'd research the eras, the sports, and sets that really interest me. Then I'd start building a collection with a clear direction. It's about taking it step by step. Now, the last time I checked, most of the people that watch my channel are males over the age of 45. So you can probably relate to where I'm at in my life and the way I approach my collecting. Now, how I did it in my 20s is very different from how I would do it in my 50s. One thing, though, that I wouldn't change is the era and the sports I collect. I'd still focus on baseball, football, and hockey cards from the 1930s to 1989 because that's the time period I connect with most. It's the history and the nostalgia from that era that means everything to me in my collecting. Now, one of the smartest moves I ever made was when I started collecting in my 20s. I was focusing on pretty much all my budget towards acquiring PSA graded key cards, which were the base cards of Hall of Famers, superstars, and players that I connected with from each Topps baseball set from 1956 to 1985. So why 30 cards, you ask? Because that's how many fit in the 3 display cases I had at my house at the time. My plan was to rotate these sets into the cases, and it became my passion acquiring these cards. It took me over a decade to complete, and it's still the foundation of my baseball collection. I did something similar with football cards, focusing on Topps, Fleer, Bowman, and Philadelphia sets from 1950 to 1989. Now I'm doing the same thing with hockey. I had a vision, a plan, and a budget. That's how I work, and it helped me build a collection that really reflects who I am as a collector. And here's an example of one of the years that I put together, 1969. You can see here some of the hockey, baseball, and football cards I have from that year. And that's really my connection. I look at each year and there's history associated with them. In many cases, nostalgic memories, not just my memories, but those of my dad, my father-in-law, my grandfather. And that's just the basis of my collection. You as a collector have to figure out how you want your collection to look. And if you have, you're sure to get a lot of joy out of collecting. Now, if I were starting today, I wouldn't be able to recreate the collection I built over 26 years. I have over 2,700 graded cards, and I simply don't have the time or the budget to build something that big anymore. So for example, instead of trying to get Frank Robinson's full Topps base run, which is what I have currently from 1957 to 1975, I choose 4 cards from that run that have the most nostalgia and meaning for me. Maybe one from each decade, or even better yet, I would take his 1959 Topps card, which is visually my favorite, his 1966 Topps, which is his Triple Crown year, his 67 Topps, which is the first in his Baltimore Orioles uniform, and then his 1975 Topps, which on back refers to him as a player manager, but he was also the first African American manager. So there's some historic value to this card, and it goes nicely with my sport magazine. I would do the same for other players I collect. I'd still have a wide variety of players in my collection, but it wouldn't be as extensive. One of the major advantages I'd have today that I didn't have 26 years ago is the amount of online resources that can help you with collecting, especially the YouTube community. There's so much out there about vintage cards now. You can see how other collectors organize their collections, learn about different cards, and pick up tips on collecting. It's definitely a big help when you're just starting out. But there's a downside to it too, specifically on YouTube. If you're just starting out as a collector, I can see where some would be envious looking at other collectors who have these massive, valuable collections. It can make you, as a collector, feel like your own collection doesn't measure up. I can also see where collectors might even be tempted to buy cards they don't really care about, just because they're popular or because someone else has them, and you want to win them over. If you fall into that trap, you risk losing sight of what really matters to you. And over time, you're building someone else's collection rather than one that is personal and meaningful to you. And I've seen collectors fall into that trap and later realize their collections don't hold any personal meaning, and they've overextended themselves financially, and now what do they have? It's all about finding what you enjoy, not just what's popular. Now for me, I had cards and magazines that I show on YouTube that probably not a lot of other people may be interested in, but I know it's something that I enjoy when I turn that camera off because it has real meaning to me. And I'm going to share a few examples of items that might not mean much to you, but are special to me. First is this 1964 Sports Illustrated with Cowboys receiver Tommy McDonald on the cover. Now, I recently picked this up from a collector who purchased a bunch of newsstand magazines at an estate sale. And this is, I believe, the first Sports Illustrated to feature a Dallas Cowboy as the main subject. And if you watch my channel, you know that Tommy McDonald's story resonates with me. He was a 5'9", 179-pound wide receiver who didn't wear a face mask for most of his career and was very tough. Players would talk about hitting him and how he would just pop right back up again. And he earned a spot in the Hall of Fame as a great receiver of his time. And I just love having this magazine to go along with my Cowboys cards in my collection. Next up is this 1976 Topps Greg Pruitt card. This card might be worth just a couple of dollars ungraded, and you might be asking why I would be buying a graded version of this card. It cost me about $15, but the reason why is I just like graded cards. That's my preference. It has a beautiful design 76 Topps with that large pink football, and it's just a nostalgic image of Greg Pruitt in the classic Browns uniform. It's the one I grew up remembering. And here you see him running in the end zone, and you can see part of the goalpost behind him. It's a card that brings me joy because I remember watching him on Monday Night Football, Brian Sipe, and wide receiver Reggie Rucker. It just takes me back to those days. And that's part of what collecting's about to me. It's what makes my collection uniquely mine. If I were starting today, these would be some of the types of cards that I would want to pick up. And I'm currently picking up now. Next here is the 1984 Topps traded Brett Saberhagen rookie. He's like never going to be a Hall of Famer, but he was a 2-time Cy Young winner in the 1980s, one of the top pitchers during that decade. And watching him pitch was a highlight for me when I was a kid. When I see this card, I think of being a fan that was obsessed with baseball in the late 80s, and he was one of the best of that time. So he's definitely somebody that I'd want to have in my collection. And I like the idea of pairing him up with my Dave Stieb rookie and my Dave Stewart rookie. Again, 3 pitchers that I grew up watching quite a bit of. Dave Stieb pitched on television quite a bit. I lived near the Canadian border, and I would oftentimes watch him on CTV, so I became very familiar with him. And Dave Stewart was my favorite pitcher growing up. He was just lights out and was a great playoff performer. And I was not a Red Sox fan at the time because I liked the Yankees, and he always pitched very well against Roger Clemens, and he always pitched very well against the Blue Jays as well, especially in the playoffs. So he was just a big time pitcher, and I just like having these types of guys in my collection. The last thing I want to talk about today is patience. It's probably the one thing more than anything else that has really helped me with my collecting. Prevented me from going down too many rabbit holes or acquiring cards based on opportunity rather than something I truly want in my collection. It's enabled me to buy cards that I never thought I would own because I've taken the time to save up for them rather than get distracted by other cards that I don't want as much. So it's been that patience that's really helped my focus in finding what I'm truly seeking. There's been times where I'll see a card and I'll end up going to bed and I want to sleep on it before deciding if I want to buy it. And that's been a good strategy for me. Unless it's something I really know I want for sure, I'll do that. And I've lost cards and magazines because of it over the years. But guess what? Life moves on and another one will pop up. If it doesn't, so be it. I wasn't meant to have it. So that's what I wanted to share today, which has really helped me over the years. Knowing my interests and my goals, collecting in a way that's personal, not a one-size-fits-all approach, focusing on what I love, not getting caught up in the trends or what other collectors are doing, being patient and avoiding rushing into purchases that don't align by collecting direction. And this has enabled me to build the collection that I want. And if I was starting again today, that would be my approach. It would just have to be narrower. So I hope you find this helpful, or at least kept your attention for a little while. I wish everybody a great weekend, and we will talk again soon.